Good evening and welcome back to the Austrian Economics Monthly. Here is your host, as usual, it's Pietro Paganini, and today I'm not in Rome, but I'm in Tuscany, and I'm very glad to be here, despite we are in a very hectic and confusing time, and a time of frustration, but I have to say, from an economic perspective, we could say also it's an exciting time because a lot of things are going on, a lot of things that have to do as well with our lives, with our liberty, and also with our prosperity. And I think, unfortunately, things are not turning out very well as we were supposing or we were expecting after 2 years of lockdown. Still, China is back in lockdown. At least some important Chinese ports are back in lockdown. Likewise, the Ukrainian conflict is impacting dramatically on our economy. But let me turn right away to two economists, two experts that will explain and describe how the war in Ukraine and how the lockdowns and how the shortage of raw material, or the shortage of everything, as we like to say, is impacting on our lives and our economy. Today we have two distinguished speakers. Happy to introduce one. Is Richard Bonugli, who is the CEO and founder of the Cedar Portfolio, an index of great business from around the world, aligned with the principles of the Austrian economics, the Austrian School of Economics, and with the Market Environmentalism. Obviously, you can read his full bio on our website. And the second distinguished speaker is Giorgio Arfaras from 1982 to 2007. Giorgio worked in the industry and finance, first at Pirelli, the famous tire and cable company, and Generali. He is the author of various books that obviously you can see on his bio on our website. Giorgio Arfaras is also a member of the board of Competere. And don't forget that this is the Austrian Economics Monthly is an event that is hosted and co-hosted by Competere and by the Austrian Economic Council. But let me move quickly to Richard. If Richard is here, the floor is yours. With this platform, we are still very new and we still have some technical problems. Let's see if it works. Richard, floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Pietro. I'm Richard Bonugli here, and wanted to begin the discussion with a focus on the consequences of the Russia-Ukraine war and the associated sanctions to the economy and the global financial system. So this is a very important question. There's a lot happening, and I'd like to highlight a few bullet points on this. First and foremost, we see it as an end to the Bretton Woods 2 system, basically at the beginning of Bretton Woods 3. So, as you know, we've had this currency system, the Bretton Woods system, initially version 1 from the 1940s to the early 1970s, and then Bretton Woods 2 from essentially the early 1970s to now. And we see now a movement to the Bretton Woods 3 currency system. We actually had a great podcast discussion with Zoltan Pozsar from Credit Suisse on this, a very well-known analyst. So he highlights this transition and emphasizes it's now a move to commodity-based currencies and countries. So we see this as a big turning point, as represented in the Russia-Ukraine war and the associated sanctions. We also see a movement to a bipolar world in the financial system. So by that I mean the SWIFT-based system in the West, and now a non-SWIFT-based system in the new bloc that is emerging, which is essentially led by Russia. You've got China along well. Other countries, Egypt, Israel, India, have recently identified that alignment. And this also stems from a project that is part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is sort of the NATO of the East, if you will. The project is called the Great Eurasian Global Partnership. And so it's basically Russia and Chinese blocs aligning together. So that this is a continuation of that initiative. As far as inflation, this is all causing rising inflation, particularly in the West, due to supply chain disruptions that initially started from the COVID time period crisis, and now from on Russia. Russia being the leading commodity producer in the world, so it's having a big effect on Europe, exacerbating the entire energy situation in Europe, which is has been heavily dependent before on Russia for natural gas imports, especially due to the increasing phasing out of nuclear energy in recent years. So this is all putting very big stresses on the financial system, on the banks in Europe, in particular on the repo market, overnight lending market, the repurchase agreement market. So we have essentially an emerging financial crisis in Europe. I mean, there's pressure now on the euro, as you can see, especially today on the European debt market, as you can see, is falling very fast. So this is where it stands, just as to initiate the discussion.
Thanks very much, Richard. Actually, I since what you said, you talk about the inflation, you talk about the beginning of a possible financial crisis, and obviously you mentioned the lockdown, the 2 years of COVID. Don't you think that the sanctions are having a very negative and in a way hard to predict impact on the entire world, a negative impact on the entire world, because it seems that the high inflation derives from Russia, and particularly from Russian commodities, is impacting very much most of the African countries, some of the Central America countries, and this could create social tensions, beside economic tensions, of course, social tensions that might again have a further impact on Europe and the European Union.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. It's there's a lot of synergistic and a loopback effect here that is making everything worse, especially social impacts as well. A lot of countries have been dependent on exports of different raw materials, whether it be in the agricultural sector or metals or energy. And so these countries are beginning to hurt very fast, could also cause social and financial disruptions. So yeah, this is happening increasingly fast. It's picking up pace. And so yeah, the emerging crisis is not only in Europe, absolutely.
Thank you, Richard. I'll come back to you later on because you provided a clear picture, but we also want to or try to figure out what could be done in order to overcome, for instance, the high inflation, or obviously we hope and we believe there could be a peace, at least in Ukraine, but also, COVID can somehow become endemic, particularly in China, and finally the Chinese government accept that the virus could exist and could still be found around. So that's overcoming this zero COVID policies. Giorgio, first of all, obviously, anything you have to add to what Richard has just said? I think he provided a very clear and complete picture. But do you have any other element to add to the discussion? And particularly, do you agree that the sanctions, particularly against Russia, are going far beyond their intended consequences? As Hayek would say, we are actually challenging and facing an unintended series of consequences here.
Of course, we have unintended consequences, but you have to imagine this. You have the economic side, that's to say the collapse of the Russian gross domestic product. Okay, less 10%. But this is not the main point. The main point is that the Russians, as citizens, cannot live as before. They are living as close to what was their life at the time of Soviet Union. No medicines, in a few months, no planes, no cars, that's to say only Russian cars, no travel around the world. So the main point of the sanction is not what can happen immediately, but the kind of change in the day-by-day life of the Russian citizen. This is, in my opinion, the point. Are they working? Yes, but with unintended consequences. As you said, one unintended consequence, you have a very high price of grain, of wheat, and this very high price is a disaster for the country in North Africa, as in Egypt, because the main part of their food is based on grain. They have to find a solution for the high price. That is to say, the government has to put the price under control thanks to a political price. But the difference between the trade price and the political price is a revenue the Egyptian state has to find. And where the Egyptian state can find this difference, increasing the price, the ships have to pay for passing the channel of Suez. So this is an example of unintended consequences. Higher ship tariff because of the shortage of the agricultural production in Russia and Ukraine, and so and so. I want to say something on what the other panelists said before. I do not believe that Russia, China, and India and these countries are strong as a lot of people think. They are very different. It is not, you cannot assume that they will be able to go together. They are at the end very poor country. In per capita income, they are very poor. China has problems with the rate of growth, and so and so. Now this is an idea of an economy based on commodities. The economy is based, the modern economy is based on industry and services. Commodities are important, but not so important. These countries have commodity, but only Russia. China has no commodity. If you excuse something, India has not commodities. The point in the field of currencies is very simple. Maybe a new currency can went up based on commodities, but the point of the currency is as a reserve of value. So you can have a commodity based, a currency based on commodity, or a system based on one and whatever you want, but these would be currencies for transition. This is a currency for exchange, not for reserve of value. For having a currency able to be a reserve value, you need a completely different story. That's to say, the democracy at the end. So you can put your money without having the fear of a dictator who take your money. So it is not so simple. One mistake we can do today is to see what is happening and put what is happening in the future linearly without any complication.
Thank you, Giorgio, very much for this very interesting articulated analysis. I wouldn't say a joke because we shouldn't joke about that, but certainly the Russian people are paying the price, but it seems that the oligarchs are still enjoying some of their resources thanks to the several paradises and countries that are hosting them. It's correctly that particularly the north of Africa, but also central of Africa. What has happened in the past is that in the past few years is that Russia has intensified its operations in Africa in order to make African countries dependent. So we were very much focused on what China was doing in Africa, and somehow we missed what Russia was otherwise doing in Africa. As well. Richard, I want to come back to you following both your interesting analysis, and I have to say I'm very happy that Giorgio said I don't agree with the previous speaker, and it's the great symptom that there is a debate. And unfortunately, lately we're too much polarized, and I'm taking part in two seminars where people agree on with each other, and that's I think is not the purpose of seminars. That's the purpose of football fans or football matches. Richard, given this unintended consequences that we are experiencing that might have a risk of turmoils, as we said, particularly in Africa. Giorgio mentioned Egypt, but we can think about Syria, we may think about Lebanon, Central Africa. We saw what has happened recently in some South American countries. Do you have any sort of encouragement or any sort of suggestion to governments on how to overcome such crisis?
Yeah, and yeah, just to clarify on the point of moving to or what may be happening in terms of a move to Bretton Woods 3 currency system. So Zoltan Pozsar from Credit Suisse was basically elaborating that it's a move from the Bretton Woods 2 currency system, which is more debt-based, to something that's more based on commodity-based currencies. Not necessarily only those countries, but certainly the countries aligned with Russia and in this type of emerging bloc, include also Brazil, South America, Africa, if you will, as well. I was in the Marriott hotel for some business meetings several years ago, and lots of African dignitaries doing business with China on all types of commodities there at that time. But yeah, that's what the idea is there. And the unintended consequences, absolutely, yes, agree with Giorgio on that in terms of what it's having, especially not only at the Russian government level, but what's happened here, it's actually extended to Russian citizens, Russian people, which is a further extension than is usually done on sanctions. We had a podcast recently with Louis Vincent Gave of Gave Call. He emphasized this point as well, essentially describing that, look, in the old world, we just before this, before February 25th, we had a situation where if you bought bonds from the Western world, U.S. in particular, it was sacred, it was sacrosanct, and it was basically, it didn't matter who you are or who you are in terms of countries or citizenships, nationalities, religions, everything. But now they're making a distinction at that level. So this is a big event, a big unintended consequence. And so now if you're in a position where you're a Chinese or some other citizen even, you're going to worry. You're going to worry at the government level, you're going to worry at the citizen level, and say, maybe I shouldn't have my reserves in U.S. government bonds or the Western world. Let me begin diversifying just to mitigate that risk. So this is another very negative unintended consequence, especially to the bond market and to the reserves of the world. So very, very important point. In terms of suggestions on in a positive light, I mean, I would like to mention what maybe happens of the European Union using these sanctions to push, especially green agenda type of policy. So, energy, different types of energies, carbon emissions, all of that. So, what we have here is the opportunity that they may be taking to push those sanctions. So it's becoming an almost militant ESG environment in that sense because of going after fossil fuel companies, for example. And I want to elaborate a bit more on that because this factors into a suggestion on how inflation could be addressed and mitigated for all countries in the world. And that is in this space. Let's look at energy. So, as you know, Germany has been migrating away from nuclear energy, and then that forced them to migrate into more natural gas, which then forced them to import more natural gas from Russia. And now that Russia is, we have these sanctions where there may even be a ban by Europe imposed on Russia energy supplies. That presents a big problem, right, for food, for energy, keeping warm, all kinds of electricity consumption. So the positive aspect is, why not allow fossil fuel companies that have legacy revenue, give them a little bit of time, perhaps encourage them to do it faster, but to translate that legacy income, that legacy revenue into renewable energies, particularly into nuclear fusion energy. So, we all know why it doesn't like the nuclear fission energy. They moved away from that because of the associated radiation risks and nuclear radioactive byproducts and the waste associated with that 10,000-year half-lives. But nuclear fusion is a much cleaner source and can provide scalability. So, so this is something that has been doing a lot of research. There's a project in the Mediterranean region, France, Italy, Switzerland area there, where ITAR, they're doing a fusion project to help that development. That although the Chinese may get there first, they've reached 20 minutes of nuclear fusion activity. Fusion, just simply in very simple terms, can provide scalability, clean energy, no carbon emissions, and no radioactive waste. So it solves all the problems, and it's almost there. It just needs a little bit more development. So it's very positive, and you could drive electric cars from that point as well. It would drive down the whole cost of the entire commodity complex, since energy is at the apex of the commodity complex. So, and it's also hydrogen energy. So there's a lot of talk about hydrogen energy. Germany has gone to that. But look, hydrogen is not a source of energy. It's sort of an interim storage type of energy. So what they're doing is they're using solar and wind to make hydrogen. So this is not scalable. You might get 20% of your energy, but not scalable. And you need to supplement that, with some other energy source. So the positive is the suggestion of going to virtually unlimited clean energy source that can drive electric cars and other types of energy in the ESG goals that everybody is seeking.
Thanks, Richard. I see very much you're prepared, and I read in your bio on market environmentalism. So and this is at least will be, I promise, my proposal for the next monthly meeting on renewable energy. So certainly you will be among the panels or panelists. Thank you very much for this. And just briefly, can you tell me how and what you mean with market environmentalism?
Certainly, this is a type of environmentalism approach that has actually been formulated by the Austrian Economics Center in cooperation with the American Conservation Coalition. So it's actually a set of 4 principles that have been put together, and it's possible to become a signatory to these principles. And it's very much based on the Austrian School of Economics. So there's a strong emphasis on, of course, freedoms and liberties, but also providing a market-based solutions to environmental challenges. And there's a very strong emphasis on decentralized solutions versus centralized solutions. So we all know the disaster that centralized solutions have brought to the world, like the Soviet Union, with dried up lakes and radiation in the countryside. It's much better for decentralized solutions. People that are more local can have better solutions to challenges in the environment because they are more familiar, more intimate. They see what needs to be done. And also there's an emphasis on market environmentalism to innovation and technology. So this is very important because the idea of using technology to reduce carbon emissions is fantastic and great. And overall, market environmentalism is different from agenda-based environmentalism. So an example of that would be the Great Reset agenda from the World Economic Forum. The problem with that is it's more a lot more aspects of centralized solutions. There's a lot of authoritarian type of aspects that many people are not comfortable with. They're also failing to implement many of the UN best practices on human rights and also privacy regulations, failing to look at local regulations on privacy as well. So ultimately, that approach will fail later this decade. But so market environmentalism is actually a product of the Austrian School of Economics.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for this clarification, particularly for letting our family to know that there is this initiative going on, and it's been going on for the past year. Giorgio, coming back to you, I'm reading very much the news and obviously the policies that the International Monetary Fund is publishing every day. What would be your suggestion to governments to try to overcome this crisis, and with also particular regards to commodities, not so much in the energy sector, but what I call the human energy, therefore food commodities?
I don't know how to solve this problem. I have read a lot of things that I don't know how to solve. Okay, you have a matter. So the production is not elastic in the short term. Okay, so if you don't have something coming from Russia and Ukraine, you don't have enough food in the short term. In the long term, maybe you can start producing whatever you want everywhere. But the point is the short term. In the short term, you don't have a sufficient supply for having price under control. That's the point. So what you can do? It depends. This is not an economic issue, but it's a political issue. If you think that it is very the danger of having poor people unsatisfied is more important than spending your public money, you spend your public money. Because as Keynes said, the best thing for avoiding a revolution is to make you the revolution. So to avoid that the other make revolutions. So for having a political control, it is better to squeeze in the short term these very important stories, as happened in Italy with the price of oil, these kind of things. So you don't have a solution in the short term. In the long term is a completely another matter. I want to add something to what you said before. The pollution in Italy or in Europe is a very small part of the world pollution. In the case of Italy, it's 1% of the world pollution. So you can become greener, so your 1% becomes 0.5. So the change of the margin is very small. Okay. The point is how to cut the pollution from the developing countries. Imagine India, this kind of things. In the US, we have had a debate on this, mainly from the head of the most important banks and financial companies. What they said, the big bosses, we want to invest in a green mode all around the world, in particular in the developing country. Because if you want to become a green planet, we need to invest there and not in the very rich countries, because the very rich countries are very ahead in the transformation. But this is very, very dangerous. We don't have resources for taking this risk of investing in developing countries to control the pollution. So we need a protection, like a Greenspan put. Something to protect the financial industry from the investment in third world country to push the earth in a greener mode. That's to say, the International Monetary Fund, that's to say, the World Bank, that's to say, at the end, the treasuries of the richest countries. So we probably, because this is my prediction, it is not the forecast. In terms of Popper, is a prediction, not a forecast. We will have in the future the market green, as you told before, but we will have to the state green. That's to say, for pushing the earth out of pollution, we need to invest in India, for example. And the Indians don't have the money. We have the money, but this is too much risk, so we need a green put, not Greenspan, but green put for doing this. I am not saying that.
Do you think
it is a matter of analysis?
Do you think this is going to happen?
Not now, because we have the Ukrainian crisis. So at the moment, all the political system is rightly with the head in the war. We will see in the future. But before the 24th of February, this was an important debate, and I wrote on this matter. So without the war of Ukraine, probably we were debating this story. But why not?
Yeah. Giorgio, thanks a lot. Since we're turning the corner and heading toward the finish line, and we want to be, as usual, short and smart and try to bring not the full answers, but some inputs for debate to our followers and for the many that will surf the net, for the future generation that will enjoy the internet, if the internet will remain the same, or there will be many Elon Musk changing the internet, or at least changing some of the platform. You guys we ended up into the environmental discussion, or what we call the ecological transition. I want to end with that, and I would like to start with Giorgio and then end with Richard, since you mentioned the debate in Europe, the debate in the United States, and you mentioned before the war in Ukraine, there was a certain project being designed. Giorgio, I was expecting that kind of ideological environmentalism was sort of softening and decreasing. Do you think this is going to happen and Europe will become more pragmatic in matter of energy, so not banning what it's thought to be polluting, or Europe will continue with a very strong ideological approach?
It is quite normal that when something has to change, it starts very ideologically. This is quite evident in history, no? So you start very following an extreme reasoning. and after you learn that the things are very difficult to implement, so you become, let's say, more a reformer than a revolutionary. No, so this happened everything in Soviet Union. They started having a lot of ideas, and at the end they become very conservative. No, so why not? And it is probably, it's very likely that we will have less ideological discussion in the future, even because now we have experienced the difficulty of the timing. You cannot. Now you know that you cannot change the economy, the economy in 2 months, and for having a green economy, you have to wait this 10 years for having the nuclear plants. I don't know, 8 months for having this, this and this. So when you enter in the implementation period, you have to become a reformist, a reformer, or whatever you want. Less extreme in any case. So I agree with you. I agree and I hope.
Thank you.
To be honest, I agree and I hope.
Thank you, Giorgio, very much for being here with us. And before turning to Richard, I could say that this is a Darwinian I would say, description of how humans evolve. So we start by being very ideological, and we turn up to be very conservative. In fact, I was very ideological when I was young, and hopefully I will see myself playing golf in a couple of years in a nice Miami resort. But just beside, joking and joke in such a horrible time. But this is time of change, I would say. Richard, I'm back to you before ending. Do you see that this, talking about environmentalism, this ideological approach to environmentalism and to the ecological transition is going to soften?
I hope so, because what's happening is there's not at the same time an application of reasonability approach, right, to translating what is currently the legacy platforms for energy and food systems into renewable energies and like nuclear fusion I mentioned. So there needs to be that allowance of both time and investment, encouragement of investment. I would say encouragement on a more aggressive time scale, because it's best to do this more quickly rather than slowly. And certainly overall, the application of market environmentalism principles based on the Austrian School of Economics, using that to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So there's 17 UN development goals. Many of them are environment, energy type related. So getting to those 17 UN SDGs using market environmentalism. So yes, a combination of ideology, but also practicality, reasonableness, and allowance for transition period.
Thank you, Richard, very much. We are now at the end of our Austrian Economics Monthly. The seminars that for the past 2 years have moved online, and I would say thanks to COVID, unfortunately thanks to COVID, we started this great adventure with the Austrian Economics Council and with Competitor, and every month, the last Thursday of the month, we meet online with distinguished speakers to discuss very different topics that have to do with our liberties and our economic liberties. And today we have discussed the consequences of what is happening economically, what is happening in Ukraine and Russia and the conflict, and of course the lockdowns and the continuous lockdown in China and the unprecedented shortage of everything. These are the three biggest challenges that we have, including, of course, the climate, the speed, as I like to say, of climate change. But since we talk about environmentalism next time, we'll probably discuss about the renewable energy revolution, whether it's really a revolution and whether it's something we should pursue and invest on. I want to thank our two speakers, Giorgio Arfaras and Richard Bonugli, that have brought us many inputs for discussion. Thank you so much, and thank you to the many that have followed us, and to the many that are and will follow us from anywhere around the world. Take care, and see you next.